Hey there, Salt Strong Nation. It's Joe Simons, like diamonds. We just filmed another amazing podcast episode. You are going to love this one. We actually brought on Robert Roemer. He is part of the shark research team at the University of Miami. And we talked all about the urbanization of sharks, basically urban sharks that are up living in big cities. And we're talking about how long they're sticking around. Are they more or less scared of humans, and how they're thriving and surviving in big cities like Miami. So if you're ever curious about sharks and just how these massive hammerhead sharks and big tiger sharks and bull sharks and all these different sharks are hanging around these big cities and what they're feeding on and how long they're sticking around and some of their migration patterns, you are going to love this one. So stay tuned and make sure to please subscribe to the Fish Strong podcast if you have not already. It's on iTunes, Google, Stitcher, etc. Here's Luke and I with Robbie. Hello, everyone. We are back. Joe and Luke Simons, Salt Strong brothers, and we're here, the Fish Strong podcast. I think, Luke, this is episode 24, 25. I'm losing track.
Yeah, we're getting up there, and we took that hiatus, but it is good to be back, Joe. Good to be back.
Yeah, and I want to thank all the listeners that highly encouraged us towards the end of last year, meaning end of 2017, to bring it back. And what shocked us, Luke, we were looking at our numbers in terms of people who were actually downloading this podcast, this Fish Strong podcast, and it kept going up. Even when we took like 6 months off, people were downloading it more and more. So I don't know if that's a sign that maybe we should take breaks all the time or if we just need to get back to it. But it is our big New Year's resolution. We did one last week. If you missed last week's episode, it was awesome. It was all about how to find and catch speckled trout in the wintertime. It was awesome, and we learned so much from Captain Cia Richardson, and he did a trout master course with us, and we talked a little bit about that. We talked about your tournament, so definitely go check this one out. But today, we teased it last week. Today is going to be a really cool one. I met this gentleman, Robbie. I'm going to hopefully not mess up the last name, Roemer. I'm usually pretty good about pronouncing names, and I think that's how it is, and I'll let you correct me in a second, Robbie. But I met Robbie in an event. I got invited to speak at the Florida Outdoor Writers Association, and they had some grad students from Florida. One was from University of Florida, one was Florida State, and one was University of Miami, who is Robbie, who we have on today. And Robbie's entire study, what he's been spending basically most of his life the last few years on, is studying the sharks, and in particular, kind of like the urbanization of sharks. And I thought it was really fascinating. He did some really cool analogies and the studies they're doing and the tagging and really just the research for us to understand why these sharks are moving so far in and their habitat and what they're chasing and really how it's going to affect both humans and sharks in the future. And so we wanted to bring him on. And I think sharks is just kind of one of those species that everyone's love. We're all kind of fascinated by it. And this is going to be a really, really cool episode. So, Robbie, you there? Can you hear us?
Yeah, how's it going, guys?
Good, man.
Excellent.
You down in Miami?
Yeah. Sunny, warm Miami. Well, sunny and warm as of this week. We just got out of a little bit of a cold snap, and I'm sure the guys around and girls around the country that are listening to this don't feel too bad for us being down in Florida. But yeah, it was unusually cold last week, and we had frost warnings in Miami, so we had to pull in all the plants from outside and hunker down. But yeah, we're just breaking out of it right now.
That's pretty funny. So tell us about what you're doing, or what you've been doing the last handful of years. Tell us kind of what you're doing and kind of how it got started. And I'd love to hear a little bit of your backstory too. Did you grow up down there? Is it, fishing something that's been part of your life? You've been fascinated by sharks. Kind of tell us how this all happened.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm currently a grad student at the University of Miami with the Shark Research and Conservation Program, which is headed by Dr. Neil Hammerschlag. And we're out on Key Biscayne, a little satellite campus of the University of Miami called the Rosenthal School of Marine and Atmospheric Science. We're right on the water, a beautiful location, and allows us to get out and do our research as much as we can. But I didn't always grow up in Miami. I was actually born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, and I was on the shores of the Chesapeake Bay. And in Maryland, it's really cool because you have really cold water trout streams, and 10 minutes down the road, and then 15 minutes in the other direction, you have the Chesapeake Bay. And I always grew up fishing with my grandfather and my father, and my father in particular saw that just how passionate I was about fishing and fly fishing in particular, and kind of got me exposed to working at nature centers when I was a kid and volunteering, and that just fed into going into undergraduate and getting good connections to get a good undergraduate degree, which led to me discovering sharks for the first time. I always knew I wanted to work with fish, striped bass in particular, and their migratory patterns. And when I got to my undergraduate institution, I had wonderful advisors that kind of saw that desire for me to look at migration patterns and said, well, there's other animals that have, fit these models a lot better, that are more highly migratory than striped bass. And once I went out to the Bimini Biological Field Station and studied out there for a short semester, Maymester, it was just, you get that feeling where you realize you're doing something that you love and that's all you want to be doing for the rest of your life. And I kind of was lucky enough to be hit with that when I was out there studying, and kind of devoted myself to studying sharks ever since, and worked for NOAA up at headquarters in DC, and also got a chance to work out in the Cape Luther Institute in the Bahamas. So got a little bit of experience in between my undergraduate and graduate degrees, and that's through NOAA is where I met Neil Hammerschlag and came down here. And I always had kind of I guess I don't want to say passion, but an interest in urban ecology, and always wondering, what fish could be living in really impacted areas down in the city. And so I kind of gave him a proposal looking at lemon sharks and really fragmented urbanized habitats. And he said, it's so funny that you have this interest. Dr. Austin Gallagher and I being Neil Hammerschlag at the moment, have a wonderful idea to look at urbanized sharks in downtown Miami where they're moving. And we kind of put our ideas together, and the three of us came together and just kind of created this project. And lucky enough, we got funding from Save Our Seas and Disney Worldwide Conservation Grant to do this study. And I think Neil said he was first hit with the idea of wondering what sharks could be living in downtown Miami when he was flying in from, I think, the Bahamas, and the approach took him right over Brickell. And for those that don't know, Brickell is a little city, kind of suburb right below downtown Miami. It's just high rises and condominiums that are right on the water. And ironically, that's where we caught our first shark for the project. But it kind of just melded into being this cooperative agreement with NOAA and Dr. Austin Gallagher with Beneath the Waves, excuse me, and the University of Miami to kind of look at where sharks are going in downtown Miami and where they're moving in response to urbanization. So yeah, it all worked out well, and I'm really excited to be down here living in Miami.
Yeah, I bet. Pretty cool to be catching and tagging sharks and still being near South Beach and all the other crazy stuff that happens in Miami. So I have
the Creature Conference of Miami.
Yeah, lots of creatures. I haven't been in college in many years, but I remember when I would do like a little project, we always had kind of an idea or a hypothesis of maybe what was going to happen. Like, do you guys have that? Like, is there when you guys came up with this idea and you got the funding, is there like an ultimate end goal or like a hypothesis that you're trying to prove or what?
Yeah, sure. Good question. So this urbanized aquatic research of sharks has never really been attempted before. Nobody's really attempted to look at the effects of urbanization on sharks. So what I had to do was kind of take a lot of cues and take a lot of hypotheses and knowledge gaps from terrestrial carnivore research. So, scientists that were investigating urban fox, urban coyotes, urban bobcats, and kind of took a lot of these overarching themes and put them into an aquatic environment and try to transpose them and see if these same themes will hold true into into sharks. So urban ecology is kind of new. as a field of science in general. So there's no real definition of what urban is yet. There's a bunch of different definitions, and that's kind of an issue that I address and am addressing in my papers, is that you have a gentleman that grows up in Lincoln, Nebraska, and then he moves to, Mobile, Alabama, and he wants to do an urban bird study. Well, to him, Mobile, Alabama is pretty urban, considering he grew up in, Lincoln, Nebraska. No offense to Lincoln, Nebraska folks out there. But you also have a gentleman that lives and grew up in Tokyo that wants to study avian bird species, and he's calling his environment urban as well. So you have two urban bird studies that are going on simultaneously, but we know that Tokyo is nothing like Mobile, Alabama. So there's a lot of kind of interpretation, and urban as a whole, the definition of urban is very interpretive. So I'm trying to address that in my paper as well, and in my thesis, is kind of putting down the first definition, standardized definition of what a marine urban ecosystem is. So yeah, it was really, really eye-opening to look at these urban ecology studies that were based on land, and just how eye-opening it is, and trying to develop some hypotheses to put towards the marine environment. We have three main kind of overarching hypotheses that are going into my thesis in this urban shark project. Excuse me.
Let's hear them. Don't.
Yeah. Yes. The first hypothesis is that the larger activity spaces of these sharks will be in the areas of lowest human activity. So we are finding that through like urban bobcats and coyotes, that they are avoiding human activity, and they actually switch their circadian rhythm. So they come out during the day, or they come out during the night, based upon if an animal usually comes out during the day in a natural environment, it will come out at night in an urbanized ecosystem, and vice versa. So we kind of want to see if that holds true in downtown Miami. The other kind of pillar we're looking at is something called residence time, and that is how long a shark is staying in a particular spot and not leaving that area. And that kind of, we are associating and taking what we've learned from a lot of fox studies and a lot of coyote studies and a lot of bear studies out in Colorado, where they are coming in and hanging out next to dumpsters and these what we call anthropogenic food sources, but basically just trash. So we want to see if sharks are hanging out by marinas, where there's cleaning stations, where people are cleaning their catch and discarding carcasses. We know that's frowned upon a lot, and there's signs that they don't dump. It does still happen. So we want to see if they're hanging out in these areas, kind of synonymous to the fox and the coyote hanging out in the trash or dumpster bins. And then the third and final overarching theme is just kind of, which I'll get into kind of the technology of how we track our sharks, but how many pings, how many times is a shark pinging its tag in an area, and in relation to just how urban that area is, overall number of detections.
Cool. And how many sharks do you have tagged now?
Three main pillars. Right now we have just under 100, so we have 98 sharks tagged.
Cool. And what different species?
How long does?
I'm sorry.
Go for it. Species.
You're asking about what kind of species are we encountering out there?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So we have four main study species. We have the great hammerhead, which is, I always consider at the top of the trophic level around here, which is really, really rare to even find a great hammerhead. We didn't expect to find great hammerheads in the numbers that we would find, or that we are finding in downtown Miami. They are an IUCN Red List endangered species, and we didn't think we'd encounter them at all, so we didn't even put that species on the grant until the next year, when we realized, wow, we are catching so many great hammerheads down here, we need to include them in the study. So we have great hammerheads, we have bull sharks, which are the next step down. So, and then we have black tip sharks, which are the next step down in the trophic level, and then we have nurse sharks at the what we propose to be the bottom of the trophic level. I always equate the great hammerhead to the bobcat or the lynx, and the bull shark to a coyote or fox, the the black tip to like a possum, and the nurse shark to the raccoon.
No offense to any of you black tip sharks out there.
Yeah.
And Robbie, how long do those tags last? You said you have about 90 of them out there. I mean, are those things that last for multiple years? I mean, like how long can you hear these pings for?
Yeah. The technology is called passive acoustic telemetry, and what we try to do is we'll catch a shark via what we call a drum line. It's basically a 12-inch wide piling cap that you see in any marina. We fill that with concrete, and then there's a swivel on the top of that piling cap that goes out to that has 800-pound monofilament that goes out to a 16-aught circle hook, and that's baited with usually a barracuda stake. And then from the top of that swivel is a line that goes to a float. So these big drum lines, they rest on the seafloor, and when a shark takes that barracuda stake, it can still swim in these big circles around the swivel, and that allows the shark to breathe. And it's deemed by most to be the most kind of ecologically minded way of catching these sharks, because many of them have to swim in order to breathe, something that we call ram ventilation. But we set out 10 of these along a certain area that we wish to fish, and once we catch a shark, we'll put it on the side of the boat and we'll put in an acoustic tag. So I make a little incision in the shark's stomach, and I surgically insert a small acoustic tag. It's about the size of a AA battery. It'll last. The size of tags that we use, they last about 7 to 9 years, depending, on variability. And that tag will stay with the shark for the rest of its life. But sharks have a wonderful way of healing, and that wound that I make, that surgical wound, is healed within 3 to 4 days.
Wow.
And what that tag does is that it pings every 30 to 90 seconds. And it's a supersonic ping at 69 kilohertz. And what it does is that it's constantly pinging and waiting for one of my listening stations to pick it up. So I have 33, give or take, because sometimes it gets stolen, or in Miami, sometimes someone likes to steal a yacht and then crash it into one of my listening stations, which actually happened. But
only in Miami.
It's an urban ecosystem. Yeah, exactly. But I have 33 listening stations around Biscayne Bay, from downtown Miami all the way down to Turkey Point nuclear platform. So I had this wonderful urbanized gradient. And when a shark that has this tag within it comes within around 800 meters, about a quarter mile to a half mile or away from one of my receivers, it logs the date, the time, and that unique ID code for that species. Every species gets a unique ID code, and that's all backlogged in these acoustic receivers. I then have to, after a predetermined amount of time, I have to send divers down to pull up these acoustic receivers located on the seafloor. We take all the coverings off and all the biofouling. We take all that off, and then we plug it into the computer, and we can see who's been there in the last year. So it's not like satellite telemetry as you guys see on Discovery Channel, where you get to track the animal live, online and everything. We don't have that kind of technology in acoustic telemetry yet, but what we do have is a much more affordable system. We can put out many more tags. Like, there's no way we could get out 98 satellite tags. It's just not going to happen. Also, some animals aren't really good study species for satellite tags, like a surface to transmit its location. So we use these acoustic tags. And yes, it's passive, but there's a lot of benefits to using acoustic telemetry as well, because every scientist that uses acoustic telemetry actually uses the same technology. So there are cooperative acoustic arrays that go from Nova Scotia all the way down to Brazil, in the Caribbean, in the Gulf of Mexico. And if one of my animals swims in somebody else's array, somebody else's listening stations, they get a notification, and then we all kind of collect our data and pull it together and share our data with one another. So it kind of allows this really wide network to track highly mobile species like sharks, sea turtles. It's a wonderful technology.
That's cool. So what are you finding? Like, are you finding that these sharks that you're catching in and around downtown Miami are staying put for the most part, or are they out exploring? Like, are they finding that it's comfortable because they get all the free food and they're not afraid of humans, or what's happening?
Yeah, so it's our findings. We just pulled the receivers up about 6 months ago. For all 33 have been in the water for a full year, which was really exciting for us because we didn't know what we were going to find.
Yeah,
it was really nerve wracking for me because number one, we got to find the Tusic receivers again. They're not big. They're 14 inches long, and they're black, and they just sit on the bottom of the seafloor. So you take a GPS point and you hope and pray it's going to still be there. So it was nerve wracking for me, but we got pretty much all of them except for one that was stolen. So that was a success story in its own right. But then when we uncovered and saw how many detections we really had that I had to look through, I had over 176,000 detections.
Whoa.
That I had to look through and statistically correlate. Yeah. So, after we were downloading each one and more detections kept coming in, and I was like, oh, yeah, all right, good. I got 1,000 detections. This is great. And then, 2 hours later, I'm like, holy smokes, I have over 175,000 detections. So what we're finding, to answer your question, Joe, is it kind of is all depending on species, what they're doing. Nurse sharks, we seem to have high sight fidelity, which is, what I kind of expected, meaning that they're sticking around in the same place for long periods of time. The downtown environment, as a lot of you guys know, is a lot of riprap and a lot of concrete and a lot of, very gnarly kind of bottoms. And what this does is provide a wonderful artificial habitat for nurse sharks. They kind of like to nestle in these little cracks and crevasses, and I always kind of say they're like little ostriches because they stick their heads into these little like ledges, and then they think that nobody can see them, but their whole body's exposed. But they like that kind of gnarly substrate, and we're finding that in these areas that have that kind of substrate in downtown Miami, they're staying long periods. Now, all nurse sharks aren't created equal. We did have one that decided to just take a little swim and wound up in South Carolina.
Whoa!
So that's a very long trip for a nurse shark. A lot of you guys have seen nurse sharks and know and probably have caught nurse sharks. They're not exactly built for speed if you look at them. So
yeah, that's
to
crazy.
make that trip is pretty wild. Hammerheads, on the other hand, on the other end of the spectrum, are way more mobile. So yes, they're coming in and spending certain amount of time in downtown Miami, but they're also being detected in Alabama, on the west coast of Florida, up, to the Chesapeake Bay. So they're a lot more highly mobile. However, what I am finding is during a certain time of year, under areas that have high light pollution, these great hammerheads are kind of showing up and they're not leaving. So on my data, I'm seeing these great hammerheads show up in June, and they're not really leaving. They have high sight fidelity in these certain areas, and they're not leaving until November-ish. So a lot of guides and people who fish down here are kind of already maybe putting two and two together. What else shows up in June and doesn't leave until November? That's tarpon. So what I'm thinking,
about to say, they're following tarpon.
Yeah, what I'm thinking is maybe they're following the tarpon into these downtown environments that have a lot of light pollution in the water, because that's where tarpon will hang out as well, ready to ambush, shrimp or mullet, and maybe the tarpon are there to do the same thing, maybe the great hammerheads are there to do the same thing, ambush these tarpon that are hanging out for the mullet and the shrimp. So we're uncovering a lot of new hypotheses just from this first download that we will then test and hopefully publish papers on later. Because that's the whole point of publishing, of doing this research, is so we can publish papers, we can affect policy. And, if we're finding out that these endangered great hammerheads are coming down to downtown Miami and are staying for long periods of time, well, we might have to influence policy to help conserve these species, So, yeah, we're getting some really, really, really cool findings.
That's awesome. So I think a question I have, and I'm sure other people listening might have, are these sharks in particular, like the great hammerhead and like bull sharks, maybe even tiger sharks? I know that's not part of your study, but let's just say bull sharks and the hammerheads. Are are they becoming less afraid of people as they become accustomed to seeing them? Even though you mentioned earlier that even the animals like the bobcat, they're now changing their patterns, their sleep patterns, and coming at different times because they're still, I think, ultimately scared of humans. But are these sharks becoming less afraid, where they're not spooked as easily, and they're just kind of almost a little bit bolder now? Or what are you thinking?
That's a wonderful, wonderful question. So in the terrestrial carnivore ecology realm, when I was doing a lot of my background kind of research, yes, there is a higher probability of human wildlife interaction, is what they call it. That's the technical term, aka
attacks.
The coyote ate my dog, yeah, or something kind of went down and got reported. So that's also influenced by what we call behavioral plasticity in an animal. It's somewhat species specific, but it's also individually specific. There's some theories out there that show that an individual, might have a higher behavioral plasticity, which in turn makes it more bold, more willing to explore new areas or test out new areas, or I don't want to use the word afraid, but is kind of less afraid of certain cues that might trigger another animal of the same species to flee. That's a wonderful hypothesis. I put it into my proposal to try to investigate that. There hasn't really been any research in that field for urban sharks. I'd love to do that a little later on down the line. I can see how certain sharks can maybe become not more prone to attacking people, but more bold as to maybe go up the Miami River in search of more food, and maybe aren't as afraid of boat traffic as we originally thought. There have been a lot of studies out there that say boat traffic is a big deterrent of sharks. Well, my data is not saying that. My data is saying they're there during times of the highest boat activity, downtown Port of Miami, and where they have industrial freighter ships going over them, as well as, your everyday weekender pleasure boater. And they're tolerating this for a reason. Yeah, whether it be food, whether it be the case that there's fewer predators to eat them in these, highly impacted areas, there's something there that's keeping them there. And excuse me, when I say this, I'm not trying to instill fear in people. I hope people understand that the fact that there are sharks in downtown Miami, it's no cause for concern. There's no fences underwater. They can go wherever they want. It's connected to the ocean. But it also doesn't really increase your chances of being attacked or bitten. I always say, and this is an actually true statistical analogy, you are like 6 times more likely to be bitten on the New York subway than you are by a shark. And
that's pretty funny.
It's true. I mean, I hope when I see that these sharks are entering these environments where there's a lot of people, it doesn't raise concern. They've been there for a long time. They will continue to be there. But what's really interesting from an ecological perspective, as an urban ecologist, is they are tolerating a lot of these stressors, such as boat traffic, boat noise, high influxes of fresh water from canals and from the Miami River during rain events. They're putting up with this, and there's got to be a reason that they have to put up with this. It's really taxing on a shark to be in an area with so much boat traffic and so much, high influxes of fresh water and nutrients and potential heavy metals like copper and lead and metalloids like arsenic. So all that's in this water being pumped in, and they're there for a reason. So I really hope to find out what that reason is. I think it might be food, it might be prey, but but there's a lot of different kind of hypotheses being floated around as to why they are here and staying for so long and thriving. They might all be raccoons for all I know. They might not be bobcats. They might be thriving in the trash cans, the trash panda. So we'll see. I'm really looking forward to the next 3 or 4 months, and I'm really crunching my data and analyzing my data and doing statistical analysis on it.
And so the theory, I guess, like the long term, or like the overall, is it that the sharks are showing up more than they used to, or that they're just simply not being scared off when you would think that they would be, relative to the boat traffic?
Yeah, like I think to piggyback on that, are there more sharks in downtown Miami today than there were 10 or 15, 20 years ago, based on what your data shows?
Right. That's a really good question. I would love to be able to answer that, but we've never really had a base or a baseline of what it was like 20 years ago. Nobody was really sampling in downtown Miami at the time. So I can't really say for sure if there's more or less sharks from then as to now, because I would have to have the tagging data from that time, which just didn't exist. You always hear of guides and fishermen saying, when I was here, there were more sharks, or when I was here, there weren't as many sharks in this area. So we can maybe take kind of data from stakeholders like guides and fishermen and maybe try to get a consensus of what it was like 20 years ago as opposed to today. But personally, I can't answer that question because I don't have that data. But what I do have is a comparison from more natural areas in Biscayne Bay and off our coast to downtown Miami. And what we're seeing in downtown compared to more natural rural areas is downtown we've only caught 8 species of sharks: blacknose, lemon, great hammerhead, tiger, bull, blacktip, and nurse. When we go just a little further south and off our coast, we have a much higher species diversity, somewhere around 12 different species of sharks, and in higher numbers. There aren't as many sharks as that I'm catching in downtown Miami than I am catching offshore or a little further south, in Biscayne National Park. But they are there. You have to work for them. We're out there all day. We take a small center console out, about a 24-foot center console, and we fish all day. I work my team really, really, really hard, but we love it. We have a great time. It's a very small kind of cohesive unit. It's only 5 of us out there. Usually when we do our shark tagging trips, a general trip, we like to incorporate the general public. So we take classes out. We actually focus on underserved populations, kids that have never seen the ocean before, much less been on a boat. And we take out general public, fishermen and captains and charter boat captains, and we take them out and we get to tag sharks with them. And they love it. You can see the perceptions of sharks change right in front of their eyes, especially in the kids.
Yeah.
It's really, really cool. But we just can't kind of have that sort of system running in downtown Miami, much less it's really, really kind of slow fishing. We work really hard for a couple sharks, which wouldn't be too fun for the kids. And we can't have a boat that big that can, just going in these little shallow environments up the Miami River and stuff. It just wouldn't be feasible. But yeah, we go in kind of guerrilla style, weird hours in the night, and we fish for 8, 9, 10 hours. And it's hard work. You're pulling up 60-pound drum lines all day, and it takes its toll. But there's nothing else we'd rather be doing.
That's awesome. So you're towards the tail end of this grad study, right?
Yeah. The project is going to keep going.
Okay.
Which is kind of a happy and sad moment, that I've helped kind of start up a project with Neil and Austin that has really kind of taken a life of its own, and it's taken on so many different facets. So there are grad students now that are looking at the health and physiology of sharks. So, if I'm a nurse shark living in downtown Miami and I'm eating, carcasses and refuse and trash, am I more healthy or less healthy than a nurse shark sampled in, Biscayne National Park or the Everglades? which is more rural.
And I assume you're talking about go for it. I'm sorry.
No, please go ahead.
And I assume you guys are factoring in, just the pollution, right? I mean, there's a massive port there in Miami. Last time I was there, I mean, just all the traffic and all the stuff that's going in and out of that, and not to mention all the, other stuff we're dealing with, Lake Okeechobee and some of the overflow and red tides and all that. But I assume you guys are trying to factor all that into basically just pollution in general.
Sure, yeah. We have colleagues that are actually doing sediment and water sampling, looking for toxic levels of copper and mercury and these metal and metalloids. Copper specifically, I believe they are publishing a paper on that as we speak. So I don't want to give too many results away before they publish, but I have colleagues in a couple of different institutions that are specifically looking at taking these water samples and seeing at what level is it lethal for bonefish. And we can kind of take that same methodology and apply it to sharks. And we have kind of taken that same methodology and applied it to sharks, not so much water samples, but actually through taking a fin sample. So we take a little tiny fin clip from the animal about the size of a thumbnail piece off of the dorsal fin or the caudal fin, and we can actually test that for accumulation of mercury and other toxins in the shark. And we actually just published a paper a couple of years ago that looked at that exact thing, looking at mercury concentrations in the fins of sharks, as well as a compound called BMAA, which is a big trigger of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And it's through the roof in shark fin. And these weren't even sharks that were sampled in downtown Miami. These were sharks that were sampled out in more rural environments, more natural states. So it was actually a really cool collaborative project that we did with the Miller School of Medicine. And we kind of broke down the fin compounds to see exactly what toxins were in there. And it's through the roof. So we actually put out, a paper that states that, hey, shark fin soup might be not as good for you as you thought it was.
Yeah, causing Alzheimer's. That's crazy, man. Well, awesome.
Yeah.
Dude, the time is up. It went by really, really fast. That was cool. We've never done a podcast like this where we talk a little bit more about research and ties into conservation, et cetera. So I think maybe next time we'll have you back on again and talk about what you're going to be doing after grad school, because I know you're going to continue this on, correct? In some way
correct.
Or form.
We have a lot of different. Yep. We have a lot of different things to continue, a lot of different questions that need to be answered, and it looks like I'll be lucky enough to have the possibility to do that. So
awesome.
I'm really excited to see what the future can bring, and hopefully it wasn't too technical, guys. But it was an absolute pleasure getting to speak with you guys today.
Yeah, thank you, Robbie. Where can everyone go learn more about this? Is it I'm looking on my other screen? Is
sure.
It just University of Miami Shark Research? Or is it
so we have a couple different, so we have a website, sharktagging.com, and that you can get online, you can look at our research, you can see how you can become a citizen scientist and join us for a day of shark research. We also have an Instagram account at sharktagging, and we also have a Twitter at @shark_Gulliver, and that's actually an adopted shark by Gulliver Schools. You guys can adopt your own acoustically tagged urban shark and see where it's moving, and you get a picture and a certificate, and you get probably your own Instagram handle too. So
well, that's cool.
That's cool.
Adopting a shark, that's awesome. And I'll be curious to see. I guess over years too. That's awesome. Those tags last 7 to 9 years. So after 7 to 9 years of data, that'll be really cool to see. The migratory and patterns and how often they stay and go. That'd be pretty awesome data.
Most certainly. It's the really cool positive that we get from acoustic telemetry is that it stays on much longer than a satellite tag, and if you put it in a shark when it's a juvenile, you can see it follow it all the way up to adulthood. So it's a really cool system that I think we're going to see more of in terms of science. I think it's just a process that's going to get adopted a lot more, and stay tuned, guys, because we have some really cool findings in the works, and I can't wait to talk about them and share them with y'all.
Awesome, man.
Good stuff.
Yeah, great job. Thanks for everything you're doing. And citizens of Miami, you are mostly safe, safer than people on a subway in New York. But there still are sharks in the city. I love that. I was on that one website, and the title is "Sharks in the City" instead of "Sex in the City." So pretty funny. But anyhow, Robbie, thank you so much for coming on. I'm sure we'll try to have you on in, I guess, 6-7 months, whenever you're kind of on your next venture, maybe a PhD, and see what you're doing then.
That would be amazing. I'd be honored, guys. Thanks so much.
Hi, buddy. Thanks again. Keep up the great work.
See ya.
All right, take care now.
See you, Robbie.